I'm going to introduce Cheryl Lacey here. Cheryl's an educationalist who's worked across Australia and internationally, exploring how education systems impact children and their families. As both an educator and a parent, Cheryl has seen firsthand the consequences of the failure to distinguish between a student and a child. This critical distinction has shaped her work, research, and writing. Cheryl is part of the first global cohort of professionals to complete postgraduate studies in parental alienation. Beyond her work in education, Cheryl has a long history of community service. She's been recognised with the Rotary Club of Melbourne for 20 years and has been recognised as a Dame of the Order of St John of Jerusalem, Knights Hospitaller, for her contributions to education. Your Children Take the Lead on Their Education is Cheryl's latest publication. In it, she places parents where she believes they should be, firmly at the centre of all decision-making. Cheryl continues to write, speak, and advise on the relationship between families and schools and how fundamental change begins locally. Welcome, Cheryl. So to begin with, let's cover the basics. What is parental alienation?
Child abuse. Parental alienation is child abuse. Consider this scenario. A mother says, "Daddy is dangerous." And the child hears those 3 weeks down his mouth. The senses don't infuse what is said. However, the interpretation of what is said is along, particularly the age of the child. So that leaves the way for this abuse, this child abuse to continue. And it is like a web that then can catch this individual, the first on B, the other parent, or the affected parent. It doesn't end there long because there are so many other people. So essentially, parental alienation, in my view, is child abuse.
Thanks. That's. I was going to ask your position on PA, but I think we've established that fairly early on. So what do you base that on, that determination?
I base this determination not just on research or experience, but also, as I mentioned, there is that huge web. So we often, and I must admit, I've been guilty of this saying initially that parental alienation is a complex family matter. I often disagree with that. It's not a complex family matter, it's a complex social problem because of the fact that there are so many people involved. It doesn't end with 2 parents and a child and their children. There are so many people affected by this. It is a social issue. It is not just a violent matter. Now, how I came to really understand this is that I became a naughty auntie. And it was very easy for me to be a naughty auntie when the media had reported me as a rogue parent or holding on to my views, which are that parents and families should be firmly at the centre of all decision making regarding education. So when you've got a story and a storyteller, which is usually the case in the parental alienation, you have a situation where there's acknowledgement in your right set of reports that the best story wins. I should be supporting them by not getting involved or by having others. If there is a concern, certainly there are other service providers that do the fix and standards. But the current parental alienation specifically, we know there's a bit of a trade that relates to storyteller. And how does the educator know which is which and on what grounds gives them the right to determine who they should or shouldn't get any information from or speak to or the past information to? Legally, unless that's stated in the court order, then what responsibility or right to have to involve any.
That makes sense. So how does the culture of parental exclusion in schools enable PA?
Well, schooling is something that happens inside a building. So a school is really simple. It's a building. What goes on inside it is all about the people. And the people is essentially a community of families that come together for learning and teaching. So we have this community of families that includes not just the educators, but the children and their parents as well. The educators of children as well. So what we've done over time, though, however, is create this social construct that there's an us and them, that there's the educators versus the parents, that there's home versus the school, that not everything is the right of parents to know or understand, that, information isn't always shared, so that these sorts of things that unfold. I've been giving one example out of Victoria where the Department of Education stated categorically that parents do not have a legitimate or lawful excuse to alternate school breaks. So is that separation of parent and child. So if a parent and child can be separated on the grounds of whatever reason, and it's not an immediate threat, then the flow on is naturally that parental alienation would be something that would be naturally part of what skills engagement. And I'm saying absolutely.
Okay. So they're really just an enabler for that type of perhaps bias or exclusion towards one parent when that's the situation that's happening outside of school, and then it's exacerbated within the school environment.
Yes, and if we go to the context of assumptions, and all evidence has some merit, but that's not to say that all evidence actually is accurate according to the outcome of a particular case. So as an educator, I would be wanting to get as many answers as possible prior to doing anything, number one, but those answers would be from a professional perspective. And I would also honour the right and responsibility of both parents to be engaged with their child's education. So what gives anybody in a school setting the right to pick and choose who they will and won't communicate with, unless there is a legitimate court order that states that school categorically and states the parent categorically, number one, and number two, if the parent is in danger, certainly that's something else. But if they're not in danger because of this storytelling, what gives anyone the right to not have access to a child in any situation?
So it sounds like, in your opinion, that the schools are stepping in before there is enough information to make a judgment call on whether there should be action or not.
You could say that, however, more importantly, what we have to do with this, again, in my view, is make that very clear distinction between child and student. A student is at school to learn a curriculum, and a teacher is there to teach that curriculum to the best of their capabilities. And the great thing that would happen is if that was the focus, then the professionalism of educators would rise, the respect for educators would rise, and the focus on curriculum would be extraordinary. When there's the distractions that take place and the involvement and infiltration of others in family life, we do problems, as we've seen with parental alienation, because schools become immersed in the web of this deceit and the damage that is done. The children will last a lifetime. Also, those who are also affected by it know it's a web of extended family members, peers, positive associations, etc. So
maybe, although well-meaning, they're a little overzealous in getting involved sometimes.
Silence. I'm not suggesting by any means that educators don't care. Great educators care immensely, and we would never take that away from anyone, particularly educators.
Yeah.
However, if there's a concern of, as I said, I'm using the term disengagement, then, it could occur for any given reason. So you would, look at it logically and say, well, if there's disengaging, my job is to re-engage the child. And the best thing about that is re-engaging the child, to be re-engaged as a student, because that's what they're there for. The child issues that are being dealt with are outside of the school grounds. So that child is equal as a student to every other child in that school as a student, rather than the one that people know about. Well, let me tell you about staffings.
Thank you, Cheryl. There's a lot of insights there and a lot for us to think about. So thanks for your contribution.